And it and if everybody can mute while the speakers do their presentation, that would be fantastic. I'm also going to put the closed captioning on the bottom for anybody who might want that. So we're really excited to be partnering with Assumption University on this first ever student sessions today. And this particular session will be viewed by not only students, so we're recording it as well, but we're super excited to welcome 3 advocates who will share their paths on how they got to be successful. And so how we're structuring this particular session is each one of the advocates will talk for about 15 or 20 minutes about her particular journey. And then we will take questions, and we have lots of time. So we have up to an hour and a half for this session. So don't worry, everybody's question will be answered. You'll have lots of time to ask questions. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Diane Savastano. Diane?
Well, great, Robin. Thank you so much for asking me today. It's really a privilege to be chatting with all of you. So Robin did give us some cues about what it is that she wanted us to review with you. So what she first thought we would want to talk about is what drew you to a career in advocacy. And so this is always fun for me to reflect on these things because you have to look back and you have to say, what have I done with my life? So it was actually fun to prepare for this. So I was really drawn to a career in advocacy through really identification of an unmet need of healthcare consumers. I thought and felt that they really wanted personalized and customized consulting. I'm just starting that to help them navigate the healthcare system, because as we all know, it is an incredibly complex system. What I did was I kind of identified that they were in pain, that they had these pain points, and I created a service to really help relieve the pain of those particular individuals. So, and the other thing that really drew me to this was I had done many things, which I'll review in a second, but I was really drawn to creating a work environment for myself that I had complete control over. And when I say complete control over, I don't just mean my time, I mean the quality of how I spent my time in an individual day. That was very attractive to me. So prior to that, let me back up and let me just kind of start at the beginning. I have a clinical background as a nurse, but as my career evolved, I moved away from doing direct patient care, and I found myself in various corporate settings. What was so interesting to me was that I would be in these corporate environments, and the minute someone found out that I was a nurse, they would come to me with their tales of woe about the healthcare system and how they were struggling with it. And interestingly, in the beginning, I found myself defending it. And I think that's because I was part of it, right? I was a nurse, I was delivering patient care, and I was also doing many other things. And then I thought, this is very complex. And so then I found myself really giving very concrete examples of how to manage within it. My adage at the time was that although I wanted to change the world and I wanted to change the healthcare system, I was trying to figure out, what do we do? What can we do as consumers? What do we have control over? And the one thing we have control over is ourselves and how we interact with the system. So anyway, and then as I started to kind of advise people, I found myself with my business background applying a lot of business skills. For example, do you have an agenda when you go to your doctor's appointment? We wouldn't go to a business meeting without one. Why do we go to a doctor's appointment with one? As a very practical example. So anyway, I would say an important turning point for me came in 1999. I was actually working for a large benefits outsourcing company, again, corporate environment. I was living in Jacksonville, Florida, and I had two team members, one of whom had thyroid cancer and the other had some pretty intense cardiac issues. And of course, they came to me and told me their tales of woe. And it came out with our boss that I was advising them a little. And again, I will always be grateful for this very, very progressive woman. I've had many of them in my life. But she turned to me and said, I want you to do that on company time. This is in the best interest of my employees. I love them, but also I'm looking out for the best interest of our company. I don't want them to leave. I want them to be healthy. So if I'm going to give you permission to actually execute, I went to doctor's appointments with them, I coached them, and I did that all on company time, which I thought was an amazing thing. She was really something. So I look back on that now and I think, okay, so I was kind of executing my health assist model without even realizing it. So fast forward a little bit. And I moved away from Jacksonville, Florida, and I moved back to the Boston area, back to New England, where I was from. And again, I always talk about having time in your life. I had some time. It wasn't going to work that I could continue to work for this company virtually. This was back in 2003. And so I had the time to think. I had the time to actually write a business plan. I had the time to go back to my MBA program that I had already graduated from in 1999. And I took another course on entrepreneurship because I hadn't taken that when I was there. So anyway, let me just kind of go back to background in education. So I felt I was really uniquely qualified to create Health Assist because of my background in education. I had 25 years of work experience. I was 44 at the time that I was doing this. So you can do the calculation. I've been in business for 17 years. But anyway, and every role I had in my entire life, one built upon another. And I felt like every role kind of brought me to this place. And this is what I was destined to do. So I started my career in 1980 as a nurse with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. And then from there, I did direct patient care on a surgical unit at Rhode Island Hospital for several years. I then moved into hospital management, my first foray into leadership in management. And then I moved out of that sector and I moved into the for-profit healthcare sector, where I was the director of a rehab program for people with work-related injuries. I then moved to a boutique management consulting firm. Again, my first foray into consulting. And what I realized is how much I loved consulting. And you know what I loved about it? I loved that people wanted to hear my advice and that they took it. Like that was just so cool to me. You know, it really kind of put me on a bit of a high. And then from there, I actually was laid off. Everybody should be laid off in their life. I was laid off because we were bought by a very large organization. I was eventually laid off and I made my way to actually become the director of managed care for a small insurance company. And when I look back on that, that was my least favorite role in my entire career, but it informs me every single day. So again, one thing building upon another. I went back to graduate school, I got my MBA, moved to Florida, and then worked for a large benefits outsourcing company. And again, we were managing employee benefits, healthcare benefits. So a lot of connections with healthcare in my career, but you can see that it wasn't linear. It kind of went in various directions. So throughout all of that, I really continued to learn how all the healthcare pieces fit together and how confusing it can be. But interestingly, when I did start Health Assist, I hearkened back all the way to one of my first courses in nursing school, which was a communications course. And I will never forget the principles of what I learned there. And I often say that, communication is key to everything, right? So even when things are scary, I think back too of my healthcare related experiences. And I think if I could walk into a dying patient's room and create a relationship, I can create a relationship with anyone and anything. There's nothing more scary than walking into a dying patient's room. So even, a room of 350 people, not as scary as walking into that patient's room. But the other thing I hearkened back to in my early nursing career was we were really taught what we called a primary nursing model. And that model had the patient at the center. And that's how I really defined Health Assist. The client is at the center. And there are all these other sort of factors that impact a client as they are indeed embarking on healthcare. So you've got your physicians, you've got your family, you've got your hospitals, you've got your treatment centers, your insurance company, your employer. But who's at the center? And that is the client. And that really is the foundation of what we do. But that came from one of my early nursing courses. So again, previous jobs before advocacy, I kind of elaborated on those. I would say that when I did start Health Assist, I really had found myself in leadership roles, right, for years. You know, increased roles in management, but then also in leadership. And I would say that a really important piece of creating Health Assist was about establishing or identifying, I should say, my leadership framework. And that kind of harkens back again to my MBA experience. And so I've used the model of Kouzes and Posner and the 5 principles of leadership in order to embark on Health Assist. And I could elaborate on those later. I put a timer on for myself, so I'm just looking at my timer. In terms of jobs in advocacy, the only role that I've ever really done in healthcare advocacy has been Health Assist, because I started it in 2004. So I can't believe, and it was November. So here I am in my 17th anniversary. Where has the time gone? I was asked, but when you think back of all the roles I had before, I was always advocating for people, whether I was a hospital executive, when I was the director of managed care. Oh my God, I was really focused on flexing benefits so that we could meet the needs of our constituents. And so, another question that I think Robin asked is, how has the role changed? I would say that my original vision for Health Assist really hasn't changed over 17 years. And I'm thrilled to say that because it has certainly grown and it's expanded. And we expanded really our services and our product line to include something different than what we primarily provide is project management of people's healthcare. That's how I like to describe it. But what emerged and evolved was there was another unmet need out there for people needing help with enrolling in Medicare and enrolling in open market insurance plans. So we have another whole line of our business where we do that. So it's changed and morphed in that we expanded, but the actual project management work really hasn't changed over the years. Doesn't mean we're not continuously learning and evolving. But I would say that I've been in this role now for 17 years. I consider myself an entrepreneur. I don't know if you're supposed to do that 17 years later. And I call myself lots of different things. I call myself a private healthcare advocate. I call myself a private healthcare advisor. I call myself a private case manager. I call myself whatever resonates with whomever I'm speaking with. And I think that's really important in this business because, again, if you've listened to any of the sessions this morning, we have a lot of work to do in this continuously emerging industry to educate the public about the fact that they might have an unmet need that can be met by a service that we actually provide. And that's a challenge from a marketing standpoint. I'd say it's been the most gratifying and meaningful role I've ever had, but for a couple of reasons. One is that I love working with clients and their families, absolutely passionate about it. However, just as important to me has been that I've become an employer of 4 other individuals, one of whom is on the call today, Anne. And, my work allows them to make a living and to support themselves and their family. And I get tremendous gratification from that. In fact, when I think about my priorities, I was listening to Vanessa's presentation this morning. I thought, okay, what are my priorities? My priorities to take care of me. Do I do a great job at it? Not always, right? My next priority is to take care of my team, because if I take care of my team, they indeed can take care of our clients. Now, my family's in there a little bit too, but I didn't mention them. So anyway, I thought I would just stop there. I know Robin has an opportunity later on for questions, so happy to entertain them when my time comes.
Sounds great. And next we'll go, thanks, Diane. That was awesome. And I don't think I've ever heard you share your story kind of start to finish. So that was really fun for me to hear too. So next we're going to hear from Dr. Staci Batista. Staci?
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for having me. So I will go through my background as well and tell you about my history in health advocacy. I went to medical school and I got my MD. I ended up doing this a little bit later in life, and I had my kids during medical school. When I graduated, I had a lot of family obligations between my kids and my aging parents and in-laws. So I ended up electing to stay home. I wasn't sure how long this at-home period would last, but it ended up being for good. After years of supporting my parents and in-laws through their own health crises, heart disease, cancers, dementia, etc., as I'm sure is common with many of you as well, I came to realize how valuable my medical experience could be to people who are facing complicated illnesses. Navigating the system was hard, and I was able to make it easier for them. I did lots of volunteer work during this time, along with being a stay-at-home mom, but nothing was as compelling to me as the health advocacy work. So I began looking into health advocacy as a career, and I decided to start my own business. I completed a health advocacy course offered for medical professionals by Joanna Smith, and I set out my shingle. I spent 4 years working on my business and just recently chose a dramatic pivot. I closed my business and took a full-time position as a health advisor with Pinnacle Care. So I'd like to share with you some of the reasons that independent health advocacy didn't work for me. These are my issues, and I'm offering them to you as one person's experience, but I hope they might be useful to you also in explaining some of the aspects of 2 types of health advocacy work. And I like lists, so here's my list. First is financial reward. And while this is absolutely not why I went into health advocacy, it is an important consideration when you are putting so much of yourself into something that is clearly not a volunteer effort. So I went into my business thinking, wow, if I charge $200 an hour and work 40 hours a week, I can finally make some decent money. And again, not that this was my reason for it, but it would feel pretty good after all those years to be finally contributing financially to my family. But then I learned otherwise. Most people in private practice tend to spend about 1 to 2 hours on business work, administrative work, etc., for every hour they bill. And then there's the challenge of finding the clients, creating a steady stream of referrals so that you constantly have people coming to you instead of each time a client leaves having to search for the next. The business piece is truly hard work. It also ended up being very unpredictable. Some months would be busy and good, others would be very slow. And so this was hard on my self-esteem and my budgetary planning. Second thing was this really fulfilling my passion? I would get energized and excited periodically about growing my own thing, but it's not truly where my passion lies. I loved working with my clients. I did have wonderful clients and amazing experiences with them. I had a cancer patient and a chronic pain patient, both of whom I worked with for all 4 years of my business. I had another desperate chronic pain patient and his family who were incredibly compelling, and I worked very closely with them. I had adult kids who helped me or hired me rather to help with each of their parents in turn. Really amazing experiences where I felt like I was able to make a profound difference in someone's life. And these interactions and relationships fueled my passion for advocacy, even as my passion for running my own business dimmed. Colleagues. Now, this is another important aspect. It can be lonely as an independent health advocate. I was incredibly fortunate that there is a robust community of advocates in the Boston area, including Diane, and they had a networking group that quickly grew to become the first NAC regional group and now has over 20 members. This was perfect for me as it essentially gave me colleagues. It also gave me a place to volunteer my efforts and help to build a community, which I love. But as you can imagine, that took time away from growing my business. And it's also not something that all health advocates can find. Finally, boundaries. This is an important issue for me because I'm going to be quite open with you. I don't always have the best boundaries. And when you have your own clients who are potentially suffering greatly, it's hard to shut them off at 5 o'clock or to not talk with them over the weekend. The responsibility of them was all mine, and it could feel very heavy at times. And running my own business meant that I often would end up feeling like I needed to work on it 24/7. Time off felt like a luxury and a waste of my time when I could be coming up with new marketing ideas, writing that newsletter, posting to social media, etc. It all felt limitless. And for someone like me, that just didn't work well. So I began looking for other ways to practice health advocacy that wouldn't require me to run my own business and might address some of those issues. I remembered meeting one of the founders of Pinnacle Care at the NAC conference back in 2016, right when I was getting started. She was on a panel like this one, and she spoke about corporate advocacy. I listened to her, but I remembered thinking, I'll never do that. I want to be a health advocate and run my own practice. Corporate advocacy felt like selling out. It felt like watered down advocacy. But now I was more experienced and had learned things about myself, my strengths, and what it really required to be a solo entrepreneur. I also knew more about the health advocacy space in general. So I reached out to the same executive at Pinnacle Care. They were hiring, I applied, and I was hired as a health advisor. It's turned out to be the perfect role for me, and it addresses all of my former issues. So revisiting those issues, in terms of earnings, I now have a guaranteed salary. It's not the huge amount I thought I'd be making as an independent business owner, but it's certainly more than I ever actually brought in on my own. It's a salary and I can count on it. I also have full benefits, which, given that my husband is doing startup work, is actually very helpful for my family. Passion. 100% of my time is spent as a health advocate. There are teams of people in charge of sales, marketing, business development, human resources, and it's not me. I have my roster of clients, we call them members, and they look to me for guidance, support, and help with their medical concerns. In some ways, the work is the same as what I was doing as an independent health advocate, and in other ways different. My clients on the independent side would generally come to me during a crisis. We would work through that crisis together, and sometimes they would continue on with me for support, or they would be done. With Pinnacle Care, the memberships are purchased for a year at a time. People may come to us in crisis, or they may be fine and just want the knowledge that should something happen, they will have that support. Many of my members have staff, so I'm more often communicating directly with their staff, which is often quite fun. And some of the members are extremely wealthy, and of these, some can act very entitled, but others are very considerate and down to earth. We also have some members who are not well off and have had their memberships purchased by others. There truly are all kinds. And with all of them, I get to do the work that I love and have passion for, that of being their health advocate. Colleagues. At Pinnacle Care, I'm a member of a team. I have a team leader whom I can turn to for support and to bounce ideas off of. And our team is composed of health advisor colleagues whom I can turn to for ideas about resources, physicians, etc. At Pinnacle Care, we also have teams of medical directors and researchers who can help advise on member health issues, create extensive research reports on health-related topics, and find experts from around the country for our members to see. Pinnacle Care has deep support for the health advisors, which is great. And while we are all remote, we still chat quite a bit and support each other with difficult members and cover each other on vacations. And finally, boundaries. In my role at Pinnacle Care, I work Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. When I'm off work, I can shut off my computer, turn off my phone, and I don't need to think about it until the next day. I have colleagues to cover my members overnight, on weekends, and on vacation. And that's truly wonderful. So I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Staci. That was great. And next up, we'll hear from Vicki Yang. Vicki?
Trying to unmute myself and still not figuring it out. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you both Staci and Diane for sharing, because I have learned an incredible amount just hearing about your journeys into health advocacy. And it really highlighted points of resonance, as well as points where I'm like, oh, dang, I should have definitely done some education in that area. That would have been a lot helpful. But just looking back, how I ended up where I am here today in front of everyone here. My name is Vicki. My pronouns are she and her. I come from Victoria, BC, Canada, and I early on in my, pretty much from high school into my undergrad, I knew that I wanted to do something with people. And so for me, that route was, let me go be a psychologist, let me do an undergrad in psych. And once I finished that undergrad, I realized just how little that actually taught me about working with people. And so I pivoted and I did a postbac in social work. I'm a clinical social worker by training, and 4 days out of the week, I work in oncology care currently. But long story short, I landed where I needed to land in social work. And then I moved to Seattle for my master's degree. And I stayed here because the opportunities were plenty and the people were amazing. So that's kind of like a very abridged version of how I landed where I am here physically today. Through all of that journey, I played multiple different roles in, I would say, health advocacy and informal roles. For example, for 4 to 5 years, I was working with our, back home in Victoria, our local sexual health center, first as a volunteer, then as a birth control educator, then as a youth committee program manager, I guess is what it would be called. And then I was running their high school satellite clinics. And in those roles, I can pick out this ongoing theme of wanting to do right by the folks that I work with, wanting to make sure that the folks that I work with knew their options from as unbiased a source as possible, wanting to make sure that they were being heard in all of their treatment and care planning. And so from the early times of doing sexual health advocacy and education, I moved into mental health and substance use through my undergrad in social work. I worked a number of years in acute psychiatric facilities, inpatient psych rehab, worked on assertive community treatment teams where I was meeting people on the streets, in their tents, in their homes, to make sure that they were getting the medications they needed, getting to the appointments that they needed to be going to. And that taught me a different side of advocacy. And much like everyone here, I think we all bring our own experiences to the work that we do, and we all have our own flavor of how we approach client care and how we approach advocacy work. My advocacy work is informed by the foundation that I have in both in my education and also in my practical experience. I like to say that I practice from a lens of harm reduction. I'm not here to tell patients and clients what they need to do. I'm here to figure out what it is that their goals are, and also make sure that their voice is being heard by their providers, because oftentimes that's where the disconnect starts. And my practice is also informed on social justice. So I can't separate my education from the work that I do, because as a social worker, I see the person as an individual in an environment of influencing and intersecting these like causes and factors, push and pull. And so right now in my current role, I work with Bannister Advisors, and I really resonated with the points that Staci mentioned, which was like, hey, if you run your own business, there's so much more to worry about, to think about, to have to be in control of. And I just felt and met like this sense of gratitude that, oh my gosh, yes, I don't have to worry about that, because I work within a smaller company that does the patient advocacy work, as well as even a broader sense of advocacy work. And I am just, I have my colleagues here. They're all social workers, so we all kind of have the same understanding of how we want to practice as advocates. And I have a fantastic boss and friend who supports us by creating the structure that allows us to set boundaries, allows us not to have to worry about nitty-gritty details like billing and hours and management. And so I kind of have what I feel like is the best of both worlds, where I do get to work with clients face-to-face, one-on-one, from a distance, however it is it looks for them. And I also have the community just inbuilt in my organization, Bannister Advisors. And we're small enough that we can, like, we're all very familiar with each other. We can build the relationships without being a big corporation. Because as I said, my day job, oncology care, big organization. I have a fantastic clinic, but you kind of feel like you get lost sometimes when you work in a big organization. That's, I think, what really drew me to Bannister. I didn't even know health advocacy was a formal position until I started working with Bannister Advisors. And it was, so we call ourselves navigators. And this is kind of alluding to how Diane was also speaking of, like, we are shapeshifters. We fit the role that the client needs, and we speak the language that resonates for them. For Bannister, navigators encompass more of what we do for the clients, which is not just their physical mental health care concerns, but also estate planning, legal concerns, family dynamics, things like that, that when we do a client intake, we're looking at all of the domains of well-being and life, and making a point to highlight, hey, you say right now you're really concerned about X, Y, and Z. Maybe that's your cancer diagnosis. Maybe that's a family's dementia process. Maybe that's something else. But we also want you to know that this topic, this concern, touches on so many other areas of your life that you may also be needing some extra support with. And if you do, here's how we would propose to support you, or here's the resources we would propose to look for you, so that you can get connected to the right people. And so in that way, as navigators, we start from often a healthcare concern, and we branch out into all the other areas of folks' lives that are impacted by their healthcare. And I'm just wanting to make sure I have time, but also that I'm covering all the points. Where have I found mentors and support throughout my journey as a social worker. And I've been, like I said, I've been very lucky. Bannister Advisors allows me to have that ongoing mentorship and support from social workers and navigators who are more experienced than me. I'm one of the newer members on the team. I've been there since 2019. 2019, yeah, right before the pandemic, and then everything went virtual. And every step of the way, I've been supported by supervision. I've been supported by case consultation, and our company founder is always readily available, which has been a huge piece of me understanding what our purpose is and what our mission is. If I were to do anything slightly different, as I listened to both Diane and Staci, I'm like, dang, I really should have done a communications course or something. I really should have learned a little bit more about business, maybe listened a little bit more in that first year economics class that I took in undergrad. There's a lot of should haves, but at the end of the day, I think where I am now and everything I'm learning even from today, I'm going to bring forward and look at opportunities to expand into those areas, because absolutely having a better understanding of how business works, what the lingo is, how to present opportunities and present, I guess, like what we call statements of work to clients, really can impact the direction and the services that they choose. And sometimes I'm still talking from a social worker's, it's kind of like social work adjacent, but you have to pivot to use the right language. And I'm still learning that language, because I'm used to working with folks in healthcare systems where well, you don't have a lot of choice. So here's what you do have available to you. But now in my role as a consultant, as a navigator, I'm working with folks who have the time, have the resources, and have the capacity to look at more creative solutions. And so being able to frame those creative solutions in a way that resonates for them has been one of my biggest learnings and ongoing learnings. I'm not used to having money to work with, man. I'm used to having to work with Medicaid and Medicare and not much else. And the hardest part is probably been that pivot away from clinical work and into more of a consultative advisory role, where we say, here are the recommendations based off of my experience. I can't make that decision for you, but because you have these funds available or these resources or this time available, here's what you should look at and here's what you should consider. And that has been kind of interesting for me. I'm still learning how to wear the advisor hat a little bit more comfortably. And a lot of the times it's the same work, but just slightly different, phrased slightly differently, framed slightly differently. And for anybody who's coming into this field, I would recommend just doing your own reflective work on what it is that brought you here, whether it be financial stability, which is real, or a personal passion or personal experience that made this career more relevant for you. We can only really be our most effective selves as an advocate if we know why we're doing this work, and if we're firm on what our position in this client advocate relationship is. Boundary setting, I 100% echo Staci in the boundary setting piece. I'm still navigating a little bit of that, because while Bannister we don't have overnight coverage. So we're often like trying to, with every client, we're trying to figure out what it is that's going to be needed and how much time and how much off hours time is going to be needed. So I'm still trying to set boundaries like that, but I always say, start strong, like set those boundaries firmly at first where it feels a little too harsh, but you can always then go back. It's just harder to set firmer boundaries if you didn't start with them, because then people get used to a certain type of response, or people get used to a certain behavior. And when you take that away from them, it feels like they're losing something. And that's a thing that I learned from my first job. Actually, they were in inpatient psych. They were like, you gotta follow the rules first and just enforce those rules first. And then as you get to know folks, you can maybe make those boundaries waver a little bit more. But consistency really also helps folks feel reassured that you know what you're doing. And part of that is consistent boundaries with your time. Part of that is consistent boundaries with what you tell clients, and how you choose to run your own work. And that's me.
Fantastic. So interesting to hear about the language adjacent role. I think that was a very interesting and astute observation. So now it's the time when we are going to open it up for questions. So you can either raise your hand or put questions into the chat. Either way. Who has questions? I have a question that I think as we start out, which is for each of you, maybe in reverse order. So Vicki, Staci, Diane, what is your typical day like these days? What does that look like? So Vicki first.
Yeah, my typical day. So Monday through Thursday, I'm in clinic 8:30 to 5 for my oncology work. And so in between patients, I try not to check my phones. Again, speaking that boundary setting, I try to not be doing 2 different jobs at once, because it's not fair to my patients in the cancer clinic, and it's not fair to my clients in consulting. But I will check my phone. I'll check my emails. If I have a patient or a client for consulting that I need to meet with on Monday through Thursday, I will schedule before my clinic time or after my clinic time. I don't schedule in between, because that's the time I've dedicated to my cancer patients. On Fridays, that's the time I've dedicated to advocacy work and navigator work. And so most of the bulk of my meetings are scheduled on Fridays. The bulk of my client work is scheduled on Fridays. unless it's research stuff. If I'm just trying to like research and connect with people and get resources in line for a client, I'll probably be calling on my lunchtime during my Monday through Thursday workday, or I'll call after work, or I'll be sending emails and doing some Googling of my own after work. And that's kind of how I've organized my two jobs and my dual roles. I try really hard to not work on Saturday and Sunday. Like I'm pretty firm about to clients that, hey, if there's an emergency, let me know. But like, I'm pretty unavailable on Saturday and Sunday. And it's kind of just become this unspoken assumption that we are a Monday through Friday business.
Thank you.
Yeah, so similar to Vicki, I now work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And I dedicate myself to my members during those hours. And I'm available to them for whatever they might need. And then after those hours in the evenings, I do my NAC board work, and some of the other committees that I'm a part of. They've all graciously been able to sort of rejigger things to meet in the evenings and accommodate my new schedule. And then my weekends are free.
Diane?
So my life's a little different than that. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. It's incredibly intense, and it has been for years. And it waxes and wanes in terms of intensity. Right now, we're at an incredibly intense phase because this is open enrollment season for Medicare. So that other whole side of our business, this is the busiest time of year. But, I begin my mornings. I'm up at 4:45. I'm in my office by 6 generally. My most productive times of the day are between 6 and 9 because the phone isn't ringing. Ann and I meet once a week at 7 a.m. She's a morning person, but my days are filled with different things. As one of the challenges, I think, as I've grown my business, what I've attempted to do is to move away from doing some of the day-to-day client work. And for a period of time, I was successful at that. So then I could focus a little bit more on the strategy, on the marketing, on the sales, on all of those pieces. But I've still always kept a certain group of clients that I've had for 12 and 13 years. But it waxes and wanes. So right now I'm in a place where I'm doing tons of client work in addition to everything else. My job is to support my team. We have a weekly team meeting. I have an individual sort of meeting with each of them once a week. So that's part of my weekly routine. With regards to clients, I have always been of the adage that people are generally respectful of your time. So although they perceive that indeed, it's kind of during the week, there are numerous occasions when they might need to be in touch with you in the evening, or it's more convenient to host a family meeting in the evening or on a weekend. So, and most of the time people are respectful of that. I would say that these days I'm working most weekends. It's not my goal. But it's just one of the factors of, owning your own business. And I remember when Staci met with me years ago, and I said, Staci, running the business is the hardest part of doing this work. So I'm not balanced right now, but I hope to get there. And it's hard for me to say no. Boundaries are hard. I couldn't say no to Robin to do this today. I couldn't say no to a client that I had this morning, that I had an inquiry call with. I'll fit them in because they came from a very important referral source. So you're always trying to balance all of these things, when you're running your own business. So it's a very different proposition.
Yeah, for sure. We have this question from Anne Llewellyn. Please ask, what would your one piece of advice to people coming into the field of patient and health advocacy be? Who wants to take that?
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
You know, I love talking to students because, you know, and I don't know where people are in their career. You can be a student and have 25 years of experience. That's when I went back to school, I had 20 years of work experience. But I would say that if you're entering into this field, and I love who you have today, Robin, as speakers, because to me, you've gotten a smattering of a lot of different ways where you can execute this passion. So one of the questions, you know, I've had hundreds of people reach out over the years who want to do this type of work. And one of my first questions to them is, you know, how do you want to execute it? Do you want to own your own business? Number one, and let's talk about, and if you say yes, well, what does that look like to you? And I get a good sense right off the bat as to whether or not someone has the acumen and or the skill and or the will to be able to execute such a thing. And then the next question I generally ask them is, do you want to do this work, but you want someone else to run a business? Yes, maybe that's what I want to do. So then I think about things like Pinnacle Care, or I think about working in hospital environments or other, you know, advocacy environments where indeed you get to execute the work, but you don't necessarily have to run the business. So I generally go down those paths with individuals, is to really identify how you want to execute this passion that you obviously have. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone back to school for it.
Yeah, I think Diane's answer is great and spot on. And the only thing that I would add to that is just the caveat of, are you supporting your family in this way? And if so, you know, let's really think hard about what the best way is going to be for you to support your family and make the money that you may need to earn. You know, if you're doing this as a career, that's a very important consideration.
Yeah, and as a follow-up question to that, so Diane, you've been in business for 17 years. How were those first 4 years when you were in business? Like, was it a steep incline? Like, what was your client load? How did that build? How did you get that going?
Well, I mean, it took a couple of months to get my first client, right? And I know one of the questions, Robin, you had asked is, what would you do differently? You know, if you were to do it all over again. And I think a major thing that I would do differently is that, you know, Robin and I used to have this conversation. Field of Dreams was build it and they will come. Well, I didn't do it that way. And I wish I had done a little more of building it and they will come, because I did it more like they will come and then I'll build as I go along. Well, then I found myself always kind of being, you know, doing just in time sort of growth strategies. And it was hard. It was challenging, but it took you know, and I started out by letting everyone I know and have ever known in my entire life that I was doing this work now. So think about how you job search. It was very similar. I did a ton of networking, right? So I reached out to everyone, and it was through that process that clients began to come. I looked for those aggregators, as you would say. So my first referrals came from elder law attorneys, but I would say it took a couple of years for me to feel like I could sort of, I guess you could say, if I had to, I could sort of, I could support myself. Let's just put it that way. It definitely took a couple of years. We had, and I would say, so that was 2004. By 2008, I was ready to grow. You know, then I was feeling like I could support myself. And then we had a recession, if you remember back, those of you who are old enough. And then what happened is, and this is one of the risks of a business like this, 3 of my highest revenue generating clients all died within 2 months of each other, right? So again, when Staci was talking about consistency, you have to be able to weather these storms. And at the time, I found myself being so busy, you know, doing the work, I wasn't out there marketing. So there's always that balance. So if I were to do it differently, I would have invested more money up front. I would have hired an admin person to be with me from day one. I would have hired marketing and PR consultants from day one. I added those people as I went along, but I think that it would have occurred faster had I done all of that. And it was a brand new industry. So we're 17 years in, right? And so me and Joanna and Beth, we were out there way back when, kind of paving the way for newer advocates. And so I feel like newer advocates coming on board now, people who want to start their own businesses, the presentation this morning was wonderful. They can learn, I think, from some of our mistakes, and there definitely were mistakes that I made, marketing mistakes, I would say, and I'm constantly trying to share those with my colleagues. Like, don't go down that path. They're never going to refer to you. I'll tell you who's going to refer to you.
So that was great. Vicki, Staci, lessons learned, things that you wish you would have known or done differently?
In a way, I feel like I kind of needed to go through the process that I did. At least for myself, I learned so much. And I feel like I became a health advocate in the process. So to me, it does not feel like time wasted. And now I can go and I can, give my services to another company, and that's wonderful. But I feel like I'm an established advocate now. So I don't know, maybe I didn't need to spend 4 years doing it. Maybe I could have stopped after 2, who knows?
And I have never wanted to run my own business. I'll be straight up. When Diane was talking about the 2 branches, I was like, oh yeah, solidly not into the business development side. And so I hitched my wagon to a really fantastic company, and I've not regretted it since. There have been days where I've been like, oh my God, this feels overwhelming, because it does feel like you're responsible for a lot of things, a lot of moving parts with clients. And so the one thing I would recommend is for anybody who is going to take on this role, regardless of whether or not they're starting their own business or joining a pre-existing company, have your own self-care practices in place. Know what's going to help you unwind at the end of the day, how you're going to turn off the advocate hat and, pick up all of your other life identities that also are important to your overall well-being, because you're working as an advocate, and maybe it's a passion of yours, maybe it's also a way that you're able to contribute to your family. But at the end of the day, if you're not living your life and you're not enjoying it, then there's something wrong there.
Agreed. So here's another question in terms of pay sources. And this came up also in one of the sessions, I believe yesterday, in terms of there's always that challenge of individuals paying for services, being able to afford, versus companies, versus how do people who don't have as many resources get access to advocates. So anyone want to take on that question?
I can speak to it from just what I see with the clients I've worked with in Bannister. When I came into the work, I was like, oh, everyone has money. And that's actually patently not true. What I've seen is incredible generosity of family members for some clients who, for example, are on Medicaid, but are severely struggling, and the families don't know how to support this loved one. So oftentimes what we will work with is a family member who is essentially a sponsor for a client, so that the client doesn't have to worry about the bill, but then can focus on getting to the point where their healthcare is taken care of and their needs are being met. So that's one avenue that we've seen clients who have lower incomes or no income get supported through advocacy, is through loved ones, family members, friends who care about them. And I will be honest, it is a privilege to be able to engage an advocate. But sometimes there are also foundations that can help. For example, I don't know how my one cancer patient was able to connect with the patient advocate, but she had a patient advocate somehow through, I think, a cancer fund. And they were able to locate specific clinical trials across the country to make sure that she was getting all of the options for treatment that she deserved. And so I think sometimes it's diagnosis specific. If there are funds out there for those folks, if folks have generous sponsors and loved ones, that's how I've seen some of our lower income clients come in.
Mhm.
Happy to address that question because I get this question a lot. So again, I think you have to make some decisions up front. So I made a decision up front that I was a for-profit business and I deserve to be paid and I'm of value. And I say that because I'm also a feminist and I'm self-described feminist since I was 15 years old. And we as women often just do not recognize our value. So I made a choice early on that that I would be paid for my services. So that self-selects the clients who can come to me. They either pay me themselves, or like you, Vicki, we have some very generous family members who often will pay us for the work that we do. I don't do any pro bono work. Again, remember I said what's most important is me and my team and then my clients. Well, in order for me to support my team, I have to have a profitable business. And so I don't do pro bono work, but I do speak a lot. And I will speak, not only, speaking for me, I love it, but it's educational for others. And to me, that's my way of kind of giving back. I will speak to anyone. Sometimes I speak in these big, huge, very wealthy organizations. Other times I will speak at the Council on Aging. So that's my way of giving back. So that's been a choice that I've made along the way. When clients reach out to me and can't afford me, I tried to at least know of other maybe public organizations that they could go to. To your point, Vicki, sometimes it is disease specific that they might be able to gain access to some sort of service. Even when clients are working with us, we want them to access whatever they can that doesn't cost anything, right? That's our job. So that, that's been my philosophy. I struggle sometimes in our professional worlds because I think those of us who are drawn to advocacy, some of us want to change the world, right? And so you got to figure out, if you want to change the world, where you're going to do that from. And if you want to do this type of work and you want to have a viable business, well, you need to be paid.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, that leads to another question that's in the chat, which is someone asked, Lisa Ackerman, I think asked, not sure, about mentors in this industry to help people that are starting up. And there's a wide variety of mentorship programs. And I don't know if anybody out there wants to specifically address that.
Sure, I will. At NAC, we have both a program for people who are starting their own business. It's called Designing Your Practice. And those are a series of webinars dedicated to all the topics that are important when you are designing your business. From marketing, writing a business plan, how to think about charging. And then so that's specifically for people who are just starting. And then we also have a mentoring program, which is ideally suited to people who are maybe, 1 to 5 years into their practice and have some clients and have some challenging clients and would really like to have, a more experienced health advocate that they can work with and kind of talk through some of those more challenging client scenarios with. So those are two ways of obtaining that kind of support.
There are also, people might be familiar with the Alliance of Professional Health Advocates that is supportive of startups. The Aging Life Care Association is supportive of aging life professionals. And then there are a number of independent programs out there as well. So that is also an option. So highly recommend. There's a lot of options in terms of people in the chat through Whova. So kind of dig around in there and I think you'll see a lot of resources. Okay, let me just make sure here. And what other questions do people have? I see Melina Houston says, many of the individuals I've advocated for have rare diseases And there are very few advocate options for many of the conditions I have encountered. Finding an advocate through a disease-specific support organization is fantastic. I see large gaps in advocacy among populations whose diseases are rare or less known. And yeah, it's actually there is a gap, and I would recommend, I think you might have seen Brad Schwartz's presentation yesterday at the opening session. If you go onto the Greater National Advocates, gnanow.org, and type in specific rare conditions, sometimes advocates pop up if they're in that particular niche. So what other questions do you have? Anyone? And if not, I don't see any additional questions in the chat. This has been so wonderful. Thank you so much, Vicki, Staci, and Diane, for sharing your wisdom and your journeys. So interesting to hear different paths, and thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you and connecting with you through Whova after this. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.